Alright, here we are with our last little project for lesson 4, and this one I called data validation, and I really just took the project that we were working on at the beginning of lesson 4 for listing and counting things, keeping running in totals, and I added data validation. Now what I mean is we're starting to get to the point where we need to make sure before we let people check out at our store or buy something that they've actually selected something from these controls. Otherwise we're going to have all kinds of problems and errors. So look at this. As soon as this thing starts up, the cursor is in the customer box ready for me to enter a customer name, but I want you to notice that over here the Add to Cart button is grayed out. Now in order to do that you just set the enabled property of a button to false. You can still see what it says, which is nice, but it shows the user that, hey, I can click on that all day and nothing's going to happen. Now notice what we do here. As soon as I click an item in the list box, it enables this button. Did you see that? As long as there's nothing selected in here, though, you cannot add it to the cart. Alright, that makes sense. So let's try adding to the cart. Oh, it comes up and says, hey, wait a minute, you got to put in your name. So as long as I type something, and then I say add to cart, it'll then go take the item and the price, just like we've done before, and put them in the right box. And then finally, I can add another item, lottery ticket, whatever I want here. I can add all these items, and then when I do checkout, it goes ahead and prints the running total and the running amount, okay, just like we've done before. So let's take a look at how I made it behave this certain way, and also how we made sure that they pick something here, and how we make sure that they put something in the customer box. Now let me explain something here. There's nothing to keep them from typing this, okay, and checking out. I'm not validating that it's a real customer. I'm not even validating that it's letters. It could just be gobbledygook. But at least we're checking to make sure that they type in something. All right. Learning how to validate it in terms of making sure it's a social security number or phone number we'll do later on. Okay, let's look and see how I did this little puppy. And again, this is very reminiscent of our first little project where I created two module level or form level, or what you're starting to hear now, class level variables. They're up here, remember, in the form, because your form starts here. This is where the definition of your form starts. And these have to be up here, but notice they are before any of these subroutines. Okay? And option explicit on is up here. And you notice I've made two of them. Two variables, num items, which is just going to be an integer, and that's going to keep track of the number of items they bought, and this is just going to keep a running total of how much they spent. And I've set them both to 0 to initialize them. And notice what I did here. When the form first loads, when it's first being built, I set the add buttons enabled property to false. Okay, so I didn't do it in code, I did it right there. So every time the program runs initially, that add to cart button is disabled. Now what we need to do, remember, is when they, here it is disabled, when they click on something, all right, as soon as they click, we're going to evaluate whether or not something was selected, a legal choice, and then we're going to enable this. Well, let's take a look at how I did that. Down here in the selected index changed event, see this right here? I'm going to say if they selected something, that's what this is here, then go ahead and enable the button. All right? Now there's no reason to say if they didn't, disable the button. I only need one test because the thing has already been set to false, so that would just be redundant. But here's what I want to point out to you. You recall that all the items in a list box start numbering from 0. All right, go 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, how many items there are. Okay, so Microsoft said, well, if we're going to give a number back to the programmer that lets them know that nothing was selected, we obviously can't use a number from 0 on up, because those are already taken for the number of items. So what they did was they said, look, we're going to use the number -1. And if the selected index of a list box is ever -1, it means they did not select an item. Okay? Legal numbers are from 0 on up. If you test a list box, if I was to change my code here and I said, let me turn it off, if the selected index from this list box equals -1, then they didn't pick anything. Okay, that's how it works. So in my particular case, I don't want to do it that way. I want to say if it's not equal, that means that they actually pick something. So let's go ahead and enable the button. Okay? And I could have done this all in one line. Let me show you, just to give you some options. I could have done it just like that, okay, and it would work just fine. Just do it all in one line. I don't know why, but I just have a tendency to use the block method. I guess I'm just used to it, but you can use any method you want for putting these little if statements together. Okay, just remember, -1 means they did not select something. So let's go down here. Let's say they selected something and now we want to add it to our cart. We're just going to come in here and say, well, when they click the add, let's make sure they type something in the TXT customer text box. And we're going to say if the text in there is equal to double quotes. Now you remember that's what we used for a long time to erase a text box. So if there's nothing in the text box, and we're just going to signify that by double quotes, then it's going to come in and run this code. It's going to say put a message box, enter your name, set the focus back to there, and then it's going to say exit sub. Now why is it going to do exit sub? Because I figured if they didn't put their name in here and do all this, there's no reason to do everything else. I'm not going to let them function. So exit sub means it's going to jump down here and it's going to skip all of this. Okay? Now a lot of people will disagree with using these exit things. You have to be really careful, and I'm going to show you probably a better way to do this. I could rewrite it like this real quick. Okay, this is probably a lot cleaner, just like that. So we're saying if they did not put anything into the TXT customer text box right here, then we're not going to do anything else. Okay, it just comes down here and ends this. Because if this is true, and it does this, and then it does this, then it's not going to look in here. It's going to come down to see if there's any more to do. And there isn't any more to do. It's just going to sit there and wait for them to put their name in. Otherwise, if they typed something, even if it's the letter Z, if they just type one miserable thing, then it's going to come in here with this else statement and do all this. All right? Now check this out. Now we have a end if statement inside of another one. So this is nested in here. And it says if they actually selected something, which means a selected index is not 1, let's go ahead and do this. All right? So here I'm just going to do the same thing we always have. Go into the item they selected, take the first 15 characters, put it over into the item that holds the name of what they picked, whatever they picked, and then start at column 20 of the item that they picked to get the price and put the price over here. Okay? Now, again, if they didn't pick an item, okay, then none of this code is going to work. It's going to drop down here and says, please select a product. Okay? So, a lot of different ways to work with this, depending on how you want to manage your code and run your code. Okay? And I could also take these and move those up in here like this, which would look cleaner. Let me get this out of here. So structurally now, let's look at this. If they don't put their name in here, we're going to prompt them for their name and we're going to send them back, and that's it. We're done. Otherwise, else, if they did type something in here, it's going to come in and evaluate this one. So now we have to evaluate this if and if structure. If they picked something, index is not 1, index is not -1, that means they picked something. Go ahead, get the description, get the price, let's increment the number of items, and let's keep a running total. Otherwise, if they type something in the text box, but they didn't pick anything yet, okay, then it's going to come down here and say pick a product. All right. Now again, you have to think very carefully how you want these things to behave, and then you've got to write code to match that. And when you saw me run the program, you say, well, that's easy. That's a simple kind of a thing. It doesn't look that difficult. But when you're trying to do it in code, you've got to really think it out step by step. Okay. Now down here with the button checkout, all that does is it finally takes our running totals and puts them inside these two labels that I have here, label count and label grand total, and here we just quit the form. Okay, so hopefully that will help you understand a little bit about data validation, and there are all kinds of ways to make sure that people put in zip codes and phone numbers and social security numbers and things, but we'll deal with that probably in second semester. Okay, good deal. Well, that's the end of lesson 4 that we have right now. Bye-bye.